The small scout ship drifted quietly through the asteroid belt at the edge of human space. Lieutenant Jack Hayes stared at the sensor readings, fighting the boredom of another routine patrol. 6 months of flying the border had taught him every dust cloud and rock formation in this sector. Nothing ever happened here. Until today. A blinking light on his console jolted him from his thoughts. The ship's computer had detected a faint distress signal. Jack straightened in his chair and tapped the screen to enhance the reading. "Computer, identify source of signal," he ordered. "Unknown vessel type." Not matching any Earth Coalition designs, the computer responded in its flat voice. Jack frowned. Protocol stated he should report the signal and wait for instructions. The border with the Vexari Empire was tense these days, but the distress signal was weak and fading. Whoever sent it might not have time for bureaucracy. "Computer, set course to intercept," Jack said. He could almost hear his commander yelling at him already, but something in his gut told him this was important. The scout ship changed direction, weaving between floating rocks toward the source of the signal. After 20 minutes, Jack spotted it. A small escape pod drifting helplessly, its hull damaged by what looked like weapons fire. "No life signs detected," the computer announced, but pod life support systems still partially functional. Jack suited up and crossed the short distance between his ship and the pod in a spacewalk. The pod's design was unlike anything he had seen before. Sleek, with strange purple-tinted metal and symbols that definitely weren't human. Through a small viewport, he could make out a still figure inside. Using his emergency tools, Jack forced open the damaged hatch. The air that escaped carried a strange, sweet scent. Inside lay a humanoid figure in what once might have been elaborate clothing, now torn and burned. Her skin was a pale violet, and what looked like delicate scale patterns traced her temples and disappeared into her silver hair. An alien. A Vexari. Jack hesitated only a moment before checking for signs of life. The Vexari woman was alive but barely breathing. The pod's life support was failing. He had minutes, not hours, to make a decision. Without another thought, Jack carefully lifted the alien woman and carried her back to his ship. In the small medical bay, he laid her on the examination table and initiated the emergency medical protocols designed for human biology, and hoped they would help. As the medical scanner hummed over her body, the alien woman's eyes suddenly fluttered open. They were startling. Deep crimson with vertical pupils that widened in the ship's light. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, looking around the small medical bay with confusion. Then her gaze landed on Jack, and her expression changed to one of utter contempt. "Where am I?" she demanded in perfect, accented English. "You're on an Earth Coalition scout ship," Jack answered, surprised she could speak his language. "I found your escape pod. You're injured, and your life support was failing." The alien woman tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "You moved me. You touched me. You were dying," Jack said simply. "I had to get you out of there." Her crimson eyes widened with what looked like shock, then narrowed with anger. She drew herself up despite her injuries, suddenly looking regal despite her tattered clothing. "You, miserable human, dared to save me," she shouted, her voice filled with disbelief and something else. Fear, perhaps. Before Jack could respond, the woman's strength seemed to leave her. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed onto the medical table. The scanner beeped urgently, showing her life signs destabilizing. "Computer, full medical support now," Jack ordered as he rushed to stabilize his mysterious patient, completely unaware that this rescue would change the course of his life, and possibly the fate of human-Vexari relations forever. Jack didn't know it yet, but the woman lying unconscious in his medical bay was hiding much more than her disdain for humans. She was hiding a royal bloodline that made her the most valuable person in the Vexari Empire. And now, she was in his hands. 3 hours passed before the alien woman woke again. Jack had been checking the medical readouts every few minutes, watching as her vital signs stabilized. Dr. Susan Palmer, The ship's medical officer had run several scans and administered what she hoped were compatible treatments. Her biology is similar to ours in many ways, Susan had explained, but there are differences I don't understand. These implants near her spine, they're unlike anything I've seen before, and her genetic structure has markers that seem deliberately engineered. When the woman's eyes finally opened, Jack was alone in the medical bay. She looked less disoriented this time, her crimson eyes taking in everything with calculated precision. "How are you feeling?" Jack asked, keeping his distance. The woman sat up slowly, her silver hair falling around her shoulders. "Functional," she replied coldly. "Where are you taking me?" "Nowhere yet. You haven't told me who you are or what happened to your ship." She stared at him for a long moment. "My name is Lyra. That is all you need to know." She glanced around the small medical bay. "I require transport to the nearest neutral space station. I can pay." Jack crossed his arms. "This is an Earth Coalition military vessel. We don't take payments, and protocol says I need to report any contact with non-human species, especially Vexari." At the word Vexari, Lyra's posture stiffened. "You recognized my species." "We've had encounters before." "Then you know your human laws mean nothing to me," she said, trying to stand but wavering slightly. "I am not your prisoner." Jack moved forward to help her, but she flinched away from his touch. "No one said you were a prisoner," he explained patiently. "But something happened to you out there, and I need to know what before I decide where to take you." Lyra's face hardened. "I was on a diplomatic vessel. There was an internal disagreement. I left. In an escape pod, with weapons damage." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like more than a disagreement." Before she could answer, the communication system beeped. "Lieutenant Hayes," a voice called over the speaker, "we've received your last report. A Vexari diplomatic ship has filed a formal complaint, claiming humans have abducted an envoy. Would this have anything to do with your passenger?" Jack looked at Lyra, whose face had gone very still. "I'll get back to you on that, Command," he replied, then cut the connection. "They're looking for you," he said simply. "Yes." For the first time, something like fear flickered across Lyra's face. "They will not stop looking." "Who are you really?" "No ordinary diplomat gets this kind of attention." Lyra stood, steadier now, her tattered clothes still somehow looking regal on her slender frame. "If you return me to them, I will die," she said bluntly. "Is that what you want, human? To send me to my death after going through the trouble of saving me?" Jack studied her, trying to see past her cold exterior. There was something in her eyes. Pride, yes, but also genuine fear. "My name is Jack, not human. And no, I don't want anyone to die." He made a decision he knew might end his career. "We'll avoid the main routes. I know places we can go where they won't look right away." A slight widening of Lyra's crimson eyes suggested surprise. "You would defy your own people for me. Why?" Jack shrugged. "Maybe I'm just curious why someone's hunting you. Or maybe I don't like being told what to do." For the first time, Lyra's expression softened slightly. "You are strange, even for a human." Before Jack could respond, the ship's alarms blared. Susan's voice came over the intercom. "Jack, we've got company. Vexari warship just dropped out of hyperspace. They're demanding we surrender our stolen property immediately." Lyra's face drained of color. "They found me." Jack moved quickly to the door. "Stay here. Looks like we're about to find out how fast this ship can really go." As he hurried to the bridge, he couldn't help wondering what kind of property was worth sending a warship to retrieve, and what kind of secret Lyra was really hiding. Jack rushed to the bridge, his mind racing. The main screen showed the Vexari warship, 3 times the size of his small scout vessel and bristling with weapons. "They're hailing us again," Susan said from her station, getting pretty insistent. "Buy us some time," Jack ordered. "Tell them we're experiencing communication problems and need to verify their identity." He quickly plotted a course toward the nearby asteroid field. It was dangerous, but the massive Vexeri ship would have trouble following them through the tightly packed rocks. The door to the bridge slid open, and Lyra entered. She had found a spare uniform and changed out of her tattered clothes. The human outfit was too large for her slender frame, but she somehow made it look dignified. "You cannot outrun them," she said simply. "Watch me," Jack replied, firing the engines to full power. The small ship lurched forward, racing toward the asteroid belt. The Vexeri commander's face appeared on screen, gray-skinned with the same vertical pupil eyes as Lyra, but with heavier scale patterns marking his rank. "Earth vessel," he growled. "Return our property immediately, or face destruction." "Property?" Jack questioned, glancing at Lyra. The Vexeri woman stepped forward, keeping herself just out of the camera's view. "That is Commander Drek," she whispered. He serves the Grand Marshal directly." Jack nodded slightly. "Commander," he addressed the screen, "we rescued a survivor from a damaged escape pod. Under Coalition law, we're required to provide medical assistance. That survivor is Imperial property." Drek interrupted. "Return her now, or we will open fire." Jack cut the transmission. "Susan, prepare the emergency protocols. We're going dark." As Susan worked quickly at her station, the ship plunged into the asteroid field. Jack's hands flew over the controls, guiding them between massive rocks and chunks of ice. "They're following," Susan reported. "And they've launched fighters." Jack cursed under his breath. "They'd really want you back," he said to Lyra. For a moment, her royal mask slipped. "I told you they would not stop looking." The ship shuddered as a warning shot passed nearby. Jack banked hard, diving behind a large asteroid. 3 small Vexeri fighters appeared on the sensors, closing in fast. "Why are they calling you property?" Jack asked as he evaded another shot. Lyra's hands gripped the edge of a console. "In my culture, certain people belong to the state. Their lives are not their own. And you're one of those people." Before she could answer, the ship rocked violently. A direct hit. "We've lost the rear deflector," Susan shouted over the blaring alarms. "Another hit like that, and we're done." Jack spotted a narrow passage between 2 spinning asteroids. "Hold on." He pushed the engines beyond safety limits, shooting through the gap with only meters to spare. One of the pursuing fighters wasn't so lucky, crashing into the rock and exploding in a bright flash. The ship groaned as Jack pushed it harder, weaving through the increasingly dense field. A large chunk of metal tore free from the ceiling, hurtling toward Lyra. Without thinking, Jack lunged from his seat, pushing her out of the way. The metal crashed where she had been standing. Their eyes met for a brief moment, Lyra's filled with confusion. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly. "Same reason I pulled you from that pod," Jack replied, returning to the controls. "It's what humans do." Something changed in Lyra's expression, a subtle shift in how she looked at him. "The fighters are falling back," Susan reported. "I think we're too deep in the field for them to risk it." "We're not out of danger yet," Jack said, noticing morning lights on his console. "That hit damaged our life support. We need to find somewhere to make repairs." Lyra stood straighter, making a decision. "There is a mining outpost in the next sector. Not officially on any maps. They might help us." Jack raised an eyebrow. "How do you know about a secret human outpost?" "I told you I was a diplomat," she replied with the ghost of a smile. "It was my job to know things about your people that you don't want known." As the ship limped deeper into the asteroid field, Jack wondered what other secrets Lyra was keeping, and whether trusting her would save them or doom them all. The mining outpost clung to the surface of a large asteroid. It looked old and patched together, with solar panels stretching out like metal wings. Jack guided the damaged ship carefully into a small docking bay that had seen better days. "This place looks abandoned," Susan said, checking the sensors. "It's not," Lyra replied. "They just prefer to appear that way." As if to prove her right, The communication system crackled to life. "Identify yourself, or be blasted back to space," a gruff voice demanded. Jack leaned forward. "This is Lieutenant Jack Hayes of the Earth Coalition. We're damaged and need repairs." A long pause followed. "Hayes? Alan Morrison's boy." Jack's eyes widened in surprise. "Commander Morrison, you're running this place now." A rough laugh came through the speaker. "It's just Alan these days. No more commander since they pushed me out. Bring your ship in, son. We'll talk inside." The inner doors of the docking bay opened, revealing a pressurized hangar. As Jack powered down the engines, he glanced at Lyra. "How did you know about this place?" "Vexari Intelligence keeps track of all human settlements, especially unofficial ones," she answered. "This outpost trades with many species, even those your coalition doesn't approve of." They exited the ship to find a tall man with a gray beard waiting for them. Alan Morrison had aged since Jack last saw him, with new lines on his weathered face and a slight limp as he walked forward. "Jack Hayes," Alan said, embracing him. "What trouble have you brought to my doorstep this time?" "The usual," Jack replied with a smile. "Running from people who want to kill me." Alan's eyes moved to Lyra, narrowing slightly. "And who's your Vexari friend?" "This is Lyra," Jack said. "She's complicated." "Aren't they all?" Alan gestured for them to follow. "Come on, let's get you inside before someone notices your ship." They walked through narrow corridors filled with a mix of humans and aliens from various worlds. Lyra stayed close to Jack, her eyes taking in everything with cautious interest. Alan led them to a small living area with mismatched furniture. "Make yourselves comfortable. My people will start repairs on your ship." "We need to stay off the grid," Jack said. "Vexari warship is looking for us." Alan raised an eyebrow. "That's serious, huh?" He looked at Lyra again. "You must be pretty important for them to send a warship." Lyra straightened her posture, suddenly looking regal despite her borrowed clothes. "My situation is not your concern. It is if it brings trouble to my people," Alan replied evenly. A young human girl about 6 years old suddenly burst into the room. "Grandpa." The new parts came. She stopped when she saw the visitors, her eyes growing wide at the sight of Lyra. "Wow, you're purple." "Lily," Alan said gently, "what did I tell you about interrupting?" The girl ignored him, walking straight up to Lyra. "I've never seen anyone like you before. Are you an alien princess?" A strange expression crossed Lyra's face. She seemed unsure how to respond to the child's directness. "Lily, this is Lyra," Jack said, filling the awkward silence. "She's our guest." Lily smiled brightly. "Do you want to see my rock collection? I found some sparkly ones yesterday." Before anyone could object, Lily grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward a shelf of colorful stones. Surprisingly, Lyra allowed herself to be led, looking down at the child with bewilderment. "No one has ever touched me so casually," she said quietly to Jack when Lily turned away to select a rock. "Children don't care about status or species," Jack replied. "They just see people." Lyra watched as Lily excitedly showed her a blue-green crystal. "In my world, children of noble houses never speak to adults unless spoken to first. They are seen, not heard." "Sounds lonely," Jack said. Something vulnerable flashed in Lyra's eyes. It was. Their moment was interrupted by an alarm blaring through the outpost. Alan rushed to a console, checking the sensors. "We've got company," he announced grimly. "Vexari scout ship just entered the sector." Jack moved to Lyra's side. "They found us already." Lyra's face had gone pale. "They will never stop looking for me." She looked at Jack with sudden resolve. "It's time I told you the truth about who I am." Jack, Alan, and Susan gathered around Lyra as the alarm continued to blare in the background. Alan had sent Lily away with one of the miners for safety. "I am not just any Vexari," Lyra began, her voice steady but quiet. "I am Princess Lyra Vaserin, sole heir to the imperial throne of the Vexari Empire." The three humans stared at her in shock. "You're royalty," Jack finally managed. Lyra nodded. "My father, Emperor Zorith, has ruled for 200 years. He is now ill, and power has shifted to his military council, led by Grand Marshal Krev. And this Krev is the one hunting you?" Susan asked. "Yes. He arranged for me to marry him next month. The marriage would make him emperor when my father dies." Lyra's crimson eyes hardened. "But I discovered his plans are more deadly than a simple power grab. He intends to assassinate my father immediately after our wedding and launch a war of expansion against Earth colonies," Jack guessed. "Among others," Lyra confirmed. "Krev has always seen humans as a threat to be eliminated. He believes you breed too quickly and spread too far." Ellen moved to the console, checking the sensors again. "The scout ship is conducting a sweep pattern. They haven't spotted us yet, but it's just a matter of time. If they find you here, they'll destroy this outpost and everyone in it." Lyra said, "I should leave now, draw them away." "And go where?" Jack asked. "They'll just catch you." "Perhaps that is my fate," Lyra replied with a hint of sadness. Jack shook his head firmly. "No one's fate is to be a prisoner or a tool. Not even a princess." The outpost shook suddenly. Dust fell from the ceiling as a distant boom echoed through the corridors. "They're firing blind into the asteroid field," Alan said grimly. "Trying to flush us out." Another explosion rocked the outpost, closer this time. Warning lights flashed on the console. "Direct hit on the east section," Ellen reported. "Hull breach contained, but we can't take many more like that." Jack looked at Lyra. "If Krev takes over and starts a war, how many people will die?" "Millions," she answered without hesitation. "Perhaps billions before it ends." "Then we can't let that happen," Jack decided. "You need to go back and stop him." Lyra's eyes widened. "Go back? I cannot fight an army alone." "Not alone," Jack said. "And not to fight, to take your rightful place." Susan stepped forward. "Jack, what are you suggesting?" "The Emperor is still alive, right?" Jack asked Lyra, who nodded. "Then Krev isn't empowered yet. He needs you to legitimize his rule. If you return and expose his plans to your father." "My father is too weak to stand against Krev now," Lyra interrupted. "The Imperial Guard follows Krev's orders, not mine." A third blast hit the outpost, stronger than the previous two. Emergency sirens joined the alarm klaxons. "We have to move," Alan urged. "The main hangar is compromised. We need to evacuate to the emergency shelters." As they hurried through the corridors, Jack continued, "There must be others who oppose Krev. People loyal to your father who would help you." "Perhaps," Lyra admitted. "My father's advisor, Zen, never trusted Krev. And my cousin commands a fleet in the outer systems." They reached a junction where the corridor split. Alan stopped, his expression grim. "Someone needs to manually override the defense grid," he said. "Give the rest of you time to reach the emergency ships." "I'll do it," Jack volunteered. Alan shook his head. "No, son. This is my outpost, my responsibility." He pressed a data chip into Jack's hand. "This has coordinates to a coalition safe house. Take your princess there." "Ellen," Jack started to protest. Another explosion cut him off. Part of the ceiling collapsed behind them, blocking the way they had come. "Go," Alan ordered, already heading toward the defense control room. "Get these people to safety." Jack hesitated only a moment before leading Lyra and Susan down the right corridor. They could hear the sounds of the miners evacuating ahead of them. "He will die," Lyra said softly. "He's giving us a chance," Jack replied, his voice tight with emotion. "We have to make it count." They reached the emergency bay where small escape pods waited. Most of the miners had already departed. Susan quickly checked one of the remaining pods. "This one's fueled and ready," she reported. "Where are we going?" Jack looked at the data chip, then at Lyra. "First to the safe house, then. we find a way to get you back to your father. Lyra stared at him. Why are you doing this? I am not your princess. This is not your fight. Jack met her gaze steadily. If Krev starts a war, it becomes everyone's fight. Besides, he added with the hint of a smile, saving you seems to be becoming a habit. For the first time, Lyra's lips curled into a small but genuine smile. A strange habit for a miserable human. The escape pod hurtled through space, its small engines pushed to their limits. Inside, Jack, Lyra, and Susan sat in tense silence. None of them had spoken since leaving the mining outpost 2 hours ago. The distant explosions they had witnessed told them everything they needed to know about Alan's fate. Jack finally broke the silence. We'll reach the safe house in about 3 hours. We should be able to contact Earth Command from there. And tell them what? Susan asked. That we're harboring an alien princess and planning to interfere in Vexari politics. Earth Command might see this as an opportunity, Jack replied. If we help restore the rightful heir and prevent a war, they will see it as a chance to gain leverage over the Vexari, Lyra said quietly. Your leaders are not so different from Krev in that way. Jack turned to her. We're not all power-hungry. Some of us just want peace. Peace, Lyra repeated, as if testing the word. My father wanted peace too, once, before the military council gained influence. Tell us about your world, Susan said, changing the subject. What's it like to be a princess? A shadow passed over Lyra's face. It is not what your human stories suggest. No grand balls or fairy tale romances. My life has been one of study and preparation, learning the politics of 17 star systems, memorizing the lineages of every noble house, training in the ancient combat arts to prove my worthiness. Combat training. Jack raised an eyebrow. That explains how you moved during the attack. Lyra nodded. All royal children must master the blade and energy staff. It is tradition. She looked down at her hands. But tradition did not prepare me for what Krev has planned. Politics, I understand. Betrayal and murder are different. The pod's communication system suddenly beeped. Susan moved to check it. We're being hailed, she reported. Earth Coalition frequency. Jack frowned. No one should know we're here. Don't respond. Susan checked the scanner. There's a ship approaching. Coalition markings. Could be a trap, Jack warned. The communication system activated despite Susan not accepting the call. A woman's stern face appeared on the small screen. Lieutenant Hayes, this is Commander Nicole Wright, Earth Intelligence. Your emergency transponder has been active for 6 hours. Care to explain why you've gone rogue with Coalition property? Jack moved into view of the camera. Commander Wright, how did you find us? All escape pods have trackers, Wright replied. Even old mining colony ones. Now I'll ask again. What are you doing out here, and who's with you? Jack hesitated, looking at Lyra. She gave him a slight nod. I have Princess Lyra Vaserin, heir to the Vexari Empire, requesting asylum and assistance, Jack said formally. Wright's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. That's quite a claim, Lieutenant. Any proof? Lyra moved into the camera view. With simple dignity, she pulled back her silver hair to reveal a complex pattern of scales at the base of her skull, markings that formed a symbol. This is the royal crest of House Vaserin, she explained. It cannot be replicated or altered. Any Vexari would recognize it instantly. Commander Wright studied the marking. Interesting. And why would the Vexari princess be fleeing in a human escape pod? Lyra quickly explained about Krev, the forced marriage, and the planned war. Wright listened without interruption. If what you're saying is true, Wright said when Lyra finished, this is above my pay grade. I'm going to bring you aboard my ship. We need to get you somewhere secure while I contact my superiors. Jack didn't like the sound of that. Commander, with respect, we need to act quickly. The longer Princess Lyra is missing, the more time Krev has to consolidate power. And the more time I have to verify her story, Wright countered. This could be an elaborate trap. The Vexari aren't known for their honesty. Lyra stiffened. And humans are. Your people have violated 3 border treaties in the past decade alone. Let's not start an interspecies incident in an escape pod, Jack intervened. Commander, we'll dock with your ship, but I stay with the princess. Those are my conditions. Wright's expression hardened. You're not in a position to make conditions, Lieutenant. Actually, I am, Jack replied calmly. Because I'm the only human she trusts right now, and if you want her cooperation, you need me. A long moment of silence followed as Wright considered this. Fine, she finally agreed. Prepare for docking. But this isn't over, Hayes. Your career is hanging by a thread. As the communication ended, Lyra looked at Jack with new respect. You stood up to your superior for me, she said. Why? Jack shrugged. Because I made you a promise, and humans keep their promises. Not all humans, Susan muttered. Commander Wright's ship was small but well-equipped, clearly designed for intelligence operations rather than combat. After docking, Wright led Jack and Lyra to a secure meeting room, while Susan was taken to the medical bay to check for injuries. My superiors are very interested in speaking with you, Princess, Wright said as they sat around a metal table. This situation presents opportunities. You mean leverage against my people? Lyra responded coolly. Wright smiled thinly. I prefer to call it diplomatic advantage. But first, we need a plan to get you back to the Imperial Palace safely. Jack leaned forward. So you believe her about Krev? Our intelligence has noted unusual military movements in Vexari space, Wright confirmed. And the official story about a missing diplomatic envoy never made sense. A princess in exile explains things much better. She activated a holographic display showing the Vexari homeworld and surrounding space. The problem is getting you back into the palace. Krev will have security looking for you everywhere. Lyra studied the display. There is an annual ceremony in 3 days, the renewal of oaths. All noble houses must attend to pledge loyalty to the throne. Krev cannot cancel it without raising suspicions. Can we get you there in time? Jack asked. Wright nodded. My ship has a stealth drive. We can reach Vexari space in 2 days if we push it. But how do we get Princess Lyra into the ceremony? Jack questioned. She'll be recognized immediately. A slow smile spread across Lyra's face. Not if I arrive as your prisoner. Both humans looked at her in surprise. Explain, Wright demanded. Jack could pose as a human bounty hunter who captured me and is claiming the reward, Lyra said. Bounty hunters from various species are common in the outer systems. Krev would be eager to get me back quietly before the ceremony. That's extremely dangerous, Jack protested. But it might work, Wright said thoughtfully. We could create a false identity for you. Once inside, Lyra could reveal herself during the ceremony, with all noble houses as witnesses. Krev would not dare harm me in front of the entire court, Lyra agreed. Jack didn't look convinced. And after the big reveal, what's to stop Krev from having us all executed as spies? My father, Lyra said simply. Weak as he is still emperor. If I can reach him privately before the ceremony, show him proof of Krev's treachery. What proof? Wright interrupted. We have your word, but do you have actual evidence? Lyra hesitated, then reached into her borrowed clothing and removed a small crystal data key. This contains Krev's communications with military commanders, outlining plans to eliminate my father and attack human colonies. I stole it before I fled. Wright's eyes widened slightly. May I? Lyra pulled the crystal back. Not yet. This is my only leverage. I will share it when the time is right. Jack nodded approvingly. The princess was learning to be cautious. For this plan to work, Wright said, Jack will need to know Vexari protocols and customs. How to speak, how to act in the imperial court. I can teach him, Lyra offered. Then let's get started. Wright stood. I'll arrange your credentials and transport. You two work on making Jack a convincing bounty hunter." After right left, Jack turned to Lyra. "Are you sure about this? It's a huge risk." "Every moment I am away, Krev grows stronger," Lyra replied. "I must return now, while my father still lives. And if something goes wrong—" Lyra's crimson eyes met his. "Then we both die. But if we succeed, we save millions." Jack held her gaze, then nodded slowly. "Well, when you put it that way." For the next day, Lyra taught Jack everything about Vexeri noble customs: how to bow, how to address different ranks, when to speak and when to remain silent. Jack proved to be a quick study, his military training helping him absorb the rigid protocols. "Remember," Lyra explained as they practiced formal gestures, "show no emotion. Vexeri nobles see feelings as weakness." "No emotion," Jack repeated, forcing his face into a neutral mask. "Like this." "Better," Lyra approved. "But your eyes still show too much." "What do they show?" Jack asked quietly. Lyra looked away. "Concern. Care. Things that could get us both killed in my father's court." Jack gently turned her face back toward him. "Would it be so terrible if your people showed those things too?" For a moment, Lyra's royal facade cracked. "It would be different, perhaps better." She straightened, becoming the princess again. "But first we must survive to consider such changes." They continued practicing, preparing for a dangerous mission that would either save two civilizations or end with their deaths. The imperial palace of the Vexeri Empire stood like a mountain of gleaming purple crystal, its towers spiraling toward the rust-colored sky. Commander Wright's ship had dropped Jack and Lyra at the edge of the capital city before retreating to a safe distance. Now they approached the palace gates in a rented transport, Jack wearing the rough clothes of a bounty hunter and Lyra in restraints. "Remember the plan," Jack whispered as they neared the checkpoint. "I do the talking. You act defeated." Lyra lowered her head in practiced submission. "Just get me to my father before the ceremony begins." The Vexeri guards stopped their vehicle, weapons ready. Jack produced the forged credentials Wright had prepared. "Human bounty hunter Raxvan," he announced gruffly. "I have your missing royal. Expecting a good reward." The guards examined the credentials, then studied Lyra, who kept her gaze downcast. One guard touched a communication device on his wrist. "Inform Grand Marshal Krev. The princess has been captured." They were escorted through massive crystal doors into the palace. Jack tried not to stare at the alien architecture and the Vexeri nobles who watched their procession with curious eyes. He kept his expression bored, as if bringing in royal fugitives was routine business. Grand Marshal Krev met them in a private chamber. He was taller than most Vexari, with elaborate scale patterns covering much of his gray face. His crimson eyes showed no emotion as they landed on Lyra. "Princess," he said coldly, "what an unexpected surprise on the eve of our ceremony." "The reward," Jack interrupted, playing his role. "I didn't track her halfway across the system for my health." Krev barely glanced at him. "You will be compensated, human. Leave the princess with me." "Not until I see the credits," Jack insisted. "And I need to report the details of her capture directly to the Emperor. Protocol, right? For royals." This caught Krev's attention. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You know our protocols." Jack shrugged. "Been hunting bounties for 15 years. You learn things." Krev studied him for a long moment. "The Emperor is indisposed. You will deal with me." Lyra suddenly looked up, dropping her defeated act. "The law is clear, Krev. A royal's return must be reported to the Emperor personally. Or do you now make the laws as well as enforce them?" Several guards in the room shifted uncomfortably at her words. Krev noticed their reaction and forced a smile. "Of course, princess. The human may have his audience after you have been properly situated." He gestured to the guards. "Take the princess to her chambers. I will escort our guest." This wasn't part of the plan. Jack and Lyra exchanged a quick glance as guards moved to separate them. "I'll need my property back before I leave," Jack called to Lyra as they took her away. It was their code phrase. She needed to act now. In one smooth motion, Lyra broke free from her restraints and pulled the crystal data key from her clothing. "Guards," she called out, "I am your princess and rightful heir. Grand Marshal Krev has plotted to kill my father." The room froze in shock. Krev's face contorted with rage. "Seize her. The princess is delusional from her ordeal." The guards hesitated, centuries of loyalty to the royal bloodline conflicting with their recent orders. "If I am delusional, explain these." Lyra held up the crystal. "Your own words, Krev. Your plans for war with the humans. Your orders to poison my father after our wedding." Jack moved quickly to Lyra's side, drawing a concealed weapon. "Let her speak to the Emperor. Let him judge the truth." An older Vexari suddenly entered the chamber, leaning on an ornate staff. Despite his obvious weakness, the royal markings on his face were unmistakable. "Father," Lyra whispered. Emperor Zorith looked at his daughter, then at Krev, his ancient eyes sharp despite his frail body. "I heard raised voices. What is happening in my palace?" "Your Majesty," Krev bowed deeply, "you should be resting before tomorrow's ceremony." "I will rest when I am dead," the Emperor replied, "which you seemed quite eager to arrange. From what I just heard." He turned to Lyra. "My daughter, show me this evidence." Lyra stepped forward, presenting the crystal. As the Emperor reviewed its contents on a nearby console, his expression darkened. "Krev," he said finally, "you have betrayed our people and my trust." Krev's hand moved to his weapon, but the guards, seeing their Emperor's anger, quickly surrounded him. "Take him away," the Emperor ordered. "The noble houses will judge his treason tomorrow." As Krev was led away, the Emperor turned to Jack. "And you, human, you brought my daughter home safely when you could have used her for your own advantage." Jack bowed awkwardly as Lyra had taught him. "It was the right thing to do, Your Majesty." The Emperor studied him with interest. "Perhaps there is more to humans than our reports suggest." He looked at his daughter. "You have chosen an unusual ally, Lyra." "I have learned much from Jack," she replied, "about humans and about myself." Later, as Jack prepared to return to Wright's ship, Lyra found him in one of the palace gardens. "You're leaving?" she asked. Jack nodded. "My job here is done. You're home, safe. Krev can't start his war." "And if I asked you to stay?" Lyra said quietly, "As an advisor on human affairs, perhaps. Or," she hesitated, "something more personal." Jack smiled. "You mean the miserable human who dared to save you?" Lyra returned his smile, a gesture that had become more natural to her. "I was wrong about many things, Jack Hayes. Perhaps the greatest mistake was thinking our worlds must remain separate." "Is that a royal invitation?" Jack asked. "It is a beginning," Lyra replied, taking his hand in hers. "For both our peoples." As the twin suns of the Vexari homeworld sat behind the crystal towers, a human and a princess stood together, bridging two civilizations that had once seemed destined for war but might now find a path to peace.